Hello and welcome to another episode of our Blockchain Gaming News Roundup. It's Friday, the 28th of February 2025. I'm Jenny Jordan. With me is John Jordan. Hi, John.
Hello.
Hello. How are you doing?
Yeah, okay.
Good. About a week away from the official start of spring here in the UK, I think. So that's good. Been a bit more sunny this week. It's been nice, raising our spirits in an otherwise sort of gloom. not great week in terms of crypto and gaming and tokens and the lot. Anyway, I just want to start off by mentioning that Pocket Gamer is coming to San Francisco as part of GDC week. We will be there on the 17th to 18th of March. If you haven't got your tickets yet, go to PG Connect. You'll find them there. We're also coming to Dubai in May 7th to 8th. And it's the early bird ticket pricing is still active there until tonight. So hurry up and get some good prices for your tickets there. And then we got Barcelona for the first time this year, coming there on the 3rd to the 4th of June. All the information is on Pocket Gamer Connect, so go there. Right, let's kick off this week's news headlines, starting with Yuga Labs, which is quite exciting. So it's not, I suppose, kind of, I don't know, it's sort of new, what would you say, kind of general news, not just kind of relevant for Web3 gaming, I suppose, but because it's from Yuga Labs and then their Otherside metaverse, it's mostly relevant there, I suppose. So actually, not this week, it was Saturday last week, they broke the Guinness World Record. It's exciting. They had over 2,000 players in their kind of first-person shooter experiment. So it's not kind of an officially developed game. It's kind of a world within this Otherside metaverse, and it attracted 2,197 concurrent players within sort of one game world. And obviously that's possible due to the technology they're using. So tell us a bit more about that, John, please, because you know about kind of MSquared, and you've been talking about the company behind the sort of tech that Yuga Labs are using.
Yeah. So as I tend to do, I'll take a little step back. So Yuga Labs, the company behind Bored Apes and all those sort of NFT things, has sort of struggled since that NFT boom, but it's ended up sort of focusing on this thing called Otherside, which is they did a whole bunch of land sales and stuff around that. As all go into all that, it was all fun and games back in the day. But it is this play on a metaverse. So they are sort of one of the few companies using the term metaverse still. And it is going to go sort of, they've been doing these sort of various play tests of various parts of the sort of experience. It's going live in June this year, and Yuga have sort of over time very much sort of be increasingly highlighting their focus on Otherside as their sort of main project. So even in a very minor way, they had this Dookie Dash unclogged game that was sort of quite big when they did the first version of it a couple of years ago. And they did a mobile version last year, which didn't really work out at all. And they've sort of said we're sort of canning that for the time being, and everything's focusing on the other side. So Otherside will be this sort of Bored Aped sort of themed, but the other sort of elements as well. Metaverse, quite what you do in it. The moment we're sort of not entirely sure, but one element they've been doing, I think they call it Project Dragon or something like that, has been this focus on a sort of first-person shooter or a shooter sort of experience, and it's not like a Call of Duty sort of tactical experience with all these guns, and it's just basically people running around shooting each other. It's more like a tech demo, and they've been looking at I guess for sort of news worthiness, looking at breaking this Guinness World Records for the most players in a sort of concurrent space, and actually held by this game called PlanetSide. PlanetSide 2 is actually sort of well-known MMORPG from way back in the day, just a Web 2 game, and that sort of broke some records, and sort of whether you want 2,000 people all in one space shooting each other from a game design point of view is sort of debatable, I suppose. But obviously, what you said is they're focusing the stress test on the underlying sort of technology, and there are different ways of doing it. obviously some ways of doing it would just not be economically viable. So there's two things going on here. One is you can have a lot of people in the same space and sort of shooting each other, which means all the people are being tracked, in the game, and the audio and everything sort of as you would expect in a first-person shooter. And people are jumping around, and when I fire here, is it hitting you properly, or things got to work as a game. But the other part of it is that the infrastructure is cheap and sort of stable, and you get all these people in it. So that's sort of the underlying bit of it. And as you say, there's a company called MSquared, who are part of this UK company called Improbable, who are really well known in the game space, been around for like 12 years, raised a ton of money, $1 billion. And so MSquared is their metaverse play. It's nothing to do with blockchain, but it's just this very sort of what we call like a very high performance system, which of course, as they say it, very easy to set up. So that obviously that's an important thing. Improbable had issues when it first did its sort of first launch of products like 10 years ago. I think they were quite cool, but they seem to be almost impossible for developers to use them. And also, as soon as you start putting 2,000 people in these and all this sort of interaction between them, it has to be sort of very fast and not using tons and tons of servers. The whole point is, the more expensive you make it to run, then the more you have to charge people to play the game. So you want it as cheap as possible to get as many people in effectively for free, sort of thing. So that's sort of what they're doing. And they had an attempt, I think, 2 weeks ago, and they didn't get enough people. And now I think they only needed to break it. I think it was 1,600-ish was the barrier. So they went quite a lot over that. So they're quite happy about that. Why are we talking about this? Well, although MSquared is a Web 2 technology, it is also heavily linked to this new blockchain that's come out called Somnia, and that's also from Improbable. So I spoke to the CEO of Improbable on my podcast that came out this week. He's called Herman Narula, I should say, and he's a very sort of talkative, sort of visionary, really great conversation I had with him. And he does point out, he's raised $1 billion and he's still got like $250 million left in cash. So a very cash positive company. They've gone through first 5 years was pretty difficult for them. Lots of those projects didn't work out. They had to sack loads of people, sort of pivot the business and stuff. But now they're in a much sort of better place. And he says they're very sort of tenacious in terms of what their vision is. And that has been the case for sort of MSquared as a sort of a metaverse play. And then when they started thinking about blockchain, because he thinks a lot about virtual worlds, and obviously, like most of us, he thinks you can only have really virtual worlds if you have economic layers in there between the people. You can't have bank accounts and PayPal and stuff. You have to have an inherent computer money. So that means blockchain. And also he's saying we want to have more stuff on chain, and looking at the current technology out there, even if you look at L2 and L3s, some of those are quite fast. So you maybe get 10 sort of thousand transactions a second, something like that. But you tend to end up, sort of siloed. So even though you're all EVM compatible, you have all these different chains everywhere, and it becomes difficult to move assets between them, and it's not composable. And there's lots of clever things around bridging these days, but it becomes a bit of a mess at the moment. So given they've spent 10 years designing very low level tech, multiplayer sort of infrastructure, they decided they were going to make their own blockchain, which is now live in testnet called Somnium. The testnet's called Sharon. Won't go into why it's called Sharon. It's a famous computer guy. But they're claiming 1 million transactions per second. So I have no idea if that's correct or not, but they're claiming it. So it'd be pretty foolish if to some degree they hadn't fulfilled that. And their sort of point is that, you need, just as we said with MSquared, you need it to be sort of fast and cheap. For this blockchain, Somnium, it basically says it needs to be super fast, so 1 million transactions per second potentially, and very cheap in terms of gas. And so he's saying basically you could take all the transactions going on every blockchain at the moment and put them on Somnium, and they'd still have space. I mean, that's a sort of slightly crass comparison, because transactions on Bitcoin and Ethereum mainnet are sort of doing different things than you would do on Somnium. Somnium might probably not as secure as something like Bitcoin, but he's saying just for apps and games where you don't really, I mean, obviously you do care about security, but it's sort of the third bit of the what do they call it, the trilemma is that. So we'll see what happens. As I sort of said to him, does the world need another blockchain? And his sort of view is the world doesn't need another blockchain, but it does need this blockchain. So he's very much, because they've spent so much time on this sort of low level sort of speed, and he sort of says, when we probably, most people on this podcast won't remember, but when you use dial-up internet, you used it in a very specific way. You sort of you had something in mind, and you dialed your computer into the internet and did that thing, and then you came off again because you were paying every minute you were on there. But as soon as broadband came along, you were just on all the time, and you could just, it's a totally different use case. So that's his sort of view. At the moment, we're using blockchain in a dial-up way. I want to do a swap or something, or I want to do some DeFi thing, and I go in and do it. And I'm happy to pay 10 cents, $1 for the transaction fee. He says if all this stuff is sort of free, then you just, getting a lot more. I mean, we did tail off, as I tend to do, into AI and AI agents, and his sort of view, he's very much sort of aligned with me, I suppose, thinking a lot of this stuff is gonna really quite change parts of our industry. And he's saying all these AI agents are going to be all over the blockchain, and they're all going to be, sort of from that point of view, Somnium is sort of designed to have just massive capacity because most of the capacity is going to be used up by AI agents doing crazy stuff for us. So, so that brings the two things together. So the idea now, from Improbable's point of view, is they have this sort of what we call a tech stack. We could call it that. So you could just do a metaverse thing with nothing to do with blockchain and use their MSquared technology, and people are using that. But also you could obviously use MSquared, and it obviously has been designed to work really well with Somnium. So now you can have a metaverse that can have tons of people in it, tons of bots, whatever, and there's a blockchain underneath it, and there's all that sort of transactional stuff happening. And the other interesting thing I felt, because Herman has they've not been in blockchain, in the trenches, as we might say, and he has I wouldn't say sort of overly negative view, but maybe what we might call an overly realistic view, and he's just saying all these people at the moment, there's loads of companies, and they're all fighting over like a tiny amount of sort of money. They're all sort of, beggaring my neighbor. You want your token to go up, and that means the other token goes down. It's very much like everyone's fighting over this tiny little pie, and we think we need to have quite a big technology step to just make 10x, 100x the pie. And lots of people sort of say that, but I think, given the technology base that they've built in the past, and this sort of big increase in transactions, that seems to me a more coherent argument. Obviously, you have to get people onto this new blockchain, and say they've got like $250 million they want to spend over the next 5 years to encourage people. And he also says he's not really bothered about getting current crypto Web3 projects into Somnium. It's much more about Somnia. Sorry, yes, yes. He's much more about bringing in companies who are not involved in it. So obviously, in the past we've seen people like Starbucks do some NFT stuff and then stop doing it, and Nike heavily get into it and then come out of it, and he thinks that's part of because of this sort of we've got too crypto and it's just not big enough, and it's been too complex. So he sees this technology as being something that brings everything. We've discussed in the past, everything should everything be an NFT. With Somnia, everything could be an NFT at least, but at the moment you couldn't have everything as an NFT because the everything's just too expensive. So it's a bit of a way off. But the mainnet I think is going to go live fairly quickly for Somnia. If you go to the Somnia website now, the test net's up, so you can sort of start messing around. If you're a developer, you can start messing around a little bit if you're a user. There's one to keep an eye on as this year progresses. And obviously, as I say, it's very much linked into Yuga. Obviously, Yuga have got their ape chain, so how that fits into it all, I don't know. But it's quite a in the positive sense, you could think. And I guess we've been positive now with all the token prices hammered down again. But that's the sort of time. Hopefully, we when we move from everything's a meme coin to utility actually does something. And if you can have, if Yuga can launch these things with 20,000 with 2,000 people playing a game concurrently, then that would be quite a big thing. Obviously, other games we might mention as well. Sort of, there are people doing sort of these larger numbers of users, but maybe not so focused on tokens. So we haven't spoken about them so much. So maybe that's been our bad. In the short term.
No, I like the similarity with internet and how we used to dial in and pay per minute, and you were sitting there like, oh, I hope it doesn't get too expensive. Need to do this. But yeah, absolutely. Good. Right, it's about a year since the launch of Wemade Night Crows. So we'll sort of return to that, I guess, in 2 weeks' time when it's actually on the 12th of March. But Wemade has actually launched their second sort of big MMORPG, Web3 MMORPG, Legend of Ymir. It's sort of a limited launch in South Korea, but immediately sort of following the launch, it topped the Google Play. So it's seen sort of a massive success already. But yeah, this is sort of part of WeMix's kind of new strategy that they adopted end of 2024, where they basically had just boasted about we got so and so many games, over 100 games on our platform, and they were like, actually, this strategy is not working at all. We're going to focus on a few high quality games, and that's exactly what they've done since. So they've basically scaled it down or scaled it up, whichever way you want to view it. So Night Crows has been a success, but talk about the sort of grindiness of that and kind of what, yeah, from a anyway, from a revenue point of view at least. And Legend of Ymir is obviously, they're looking to sort of go in the footsteps of Night Crows. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about that, John?
Yeah, I'm just going to cough. Excuse me. Yes. So Wemade is a South Korean MMORPG company, been around for over a decade, and it was sort of not one of the bigger South Korean companies, but it's always been sort of quite focused, and its big game has always been the Mir franchise. So actually, it announced, this is back in 2022, I think, that it was going to bring one of those Mir games. I think it was Mir 3, and going to add blockchain, and that was just when Axie was really big, and that actually kicked off this massive sort of explosion in South Korean games companies wanting to do blockchain, because the Wemade share price, I think, trebled or something, like literally overnight. It just went up because blockchain was the hot new thing, and they were doing something in it. That's sort of the height of the South Korean blockchain games market, because it's all been a bit harder for them all since then. But we'll talk a bit about some of the other companies later on. So Wemade, as these other companies have done, has sort of tried various different things. But I think it's because of its background and it's a smaller company, it's been slightly more coherent because it's just not had so much money to throw around at sort of stupid projects. So its sort of idea has been, we have these very big MMORPGs that appeal maybe to quite a strong South Korean audience, and maybe Southeast Asia and stuff as well. But they're very grindy. I mean, just very, very grindy, as we'll get into. And we'll have blockchain in there, but we won't be sort of like, it's almost like we'll make it really hard to get to the blockchain. Or in other words, you could think, what's blockchain actually good for? And that's sort of high-end items. So in these MMORPGs, there's just you just end up with thousands of just weird little items that you can craft together to make certain things at certain times, and you end up with like an inventory like full of, it's not junk because it's useful, but it's sort of junk on its own, and you have to get the right things and get all the bits of all the ingredients right in the recipe and everything. So it's sort of come to the conclusion correctly that we'll just use blockchain for the sort of really valuable stuff, whatever that is in the game. And it's also tended to have this thing, which actually other people have done. So it makes logical sense, but they've done it, I think, in a more coherent way. Is we're actually going to gate the NFT stuff within the game, so you can't actually access it until you get to like a certain level. So I've mentioned this a few times recently. So as you say. They've done it in this Mir games. It's not been super successful, but it's sort of been successful enough, I think. So there's Mir 3 and certainly Mir 4 now is a sort of their biggest game, which I don't play that, so I can't talk about how they've integrated blockchain into that. But I have been playing Night Crows, which, as I say, it's almost been out for a year, and literally I've been playing it. I think 80% of the days since then, grinding for. It's a sort of an autoplay game, so you're not constantly doing stuff. You're sending your character off to basically grind out a bunch of battles. But it takes about an hour a day to sort of go through it all, and you collect all these rewards, and they're meaningless, but you have to collect them, and you slowly level up. But they've limited, like you can't connect an NFT wallet, or you can't connect their blockchain wallet until you get to level 45. Now, I'm sure if you spent a lot of money, you could get to level 45 fairly quickly, because these games tend to be sort of play to win, in a sense that if you spend money, and you can spend a lot of money in these games, thousands and tens of thousands of dollars, obviously that progresses you quickly. I spent a bit of money, maybe sort of $20-30, I suppose, for very specific items that I've needed. I'm still at level 44. So I'm looking at it now. I'm level 44, and they give you a percentage of where you are to the next level. So I'm level 44 and 65.842%.
Well, that's good, because the other day you said 48%, so that's progressed quite quickly now.
Yes, yeah. Well, it goes. I mean, as I look at it, it's going up a tiny amount all the time. But it's it's literally will have taken me a year to get to level 45, and that means I can then connect a wallet. And that means I don't really know actually what that means at that point. There are NFTs in the marketplace, so maybe they're really expensive, so I'm not really going to buy one of those. And I think it means I can mint my character out, so I can sort of save it. And if I could potentially trade it, I mean, my character won't be worth anything because it's not a very. It's sort of I've not got anything cool. I've just got the default sort of options there, and they do have this more complicated token system. So there is a crow token and various. Some of the more rare sort of items in the game or commodities in the game have their own token, so you can sort of swap between those as well. So that sort of stuff opens up, and I'm not really into these games personally, but I'm just so desperate to get to see what happens, and probably I'll be disappointed. But anyway, so and as a model, I wouldn't really say the blockchain side of it. It's hard to judge how important that's been to the overall game in terms of retention or monetization. I guess from my own personal view, I wouldn't have played this game without blockchain, and I have spent $50. So I don't think there's many of me. I don't think there's many of me out there in this game, but to some degree there's that. And I think the way they've done it is, unless there's blockchain in there, most people never reach it. So it doesn't have a detrimental impact on the game. And the game is, a sort of quite hardcore. I mean, it's really nice looking. A Unreal 5 engine game on mobile. I think there's a PC version as well. And it's sort of there's a fairly decent storyline. I mean, these things are not Shakespeare, but there's sort of like a bit of a medieval sort of thing going on there, and so you go through it all. It's sort of but okay. So I think, and I've not checked this, but people have been saying they basically hit about their revenue for that game is estimated about $200 million in a year. So as I say, I think 1% of that will be to do with Web3. So just as a Web2 game with a Web3 sort of, it's not a bolt-on, but with a Web3 elements in there, that game has been successful. I wouldn't say it's been massively successful, because probably it took 50, 60, 70 million dollars to make. I mean, these things are, you need big teams for 5 years to build these games. So it's not like a massive knockout success, but probably, it gets about 200,000, 250,000 daily players just playing the game. We may put those figures out. They're quite good. They're quite open about that sort of stuff. So it's certainly not been, certainly there is an argument that it is one of the top 5 most successful blockchain games, in the sense that it's not a fully blockchain game like Pixels would be, but it's a game with blockchain. So from that point of view, I think Wemade will just be going, it's taking a long time, but our philosophy of building these massive big games and then having some blockchain elements in there, it's sort of working. So this new game is in a sense, some ways broadly similar to. I mean, it's not really. It's a Norse mythology inspired game. So you have all that sort of Ragnarok type stuff. I mean, again, it looks amazing. It's Unreal 5. It's mobile PC. I'm not quite sure how the Web3 stuff is integrated. It's only out in Korea. Been number 1 on the Google Play App Store in Korea at launch, as these big things tend to be. Global launch, I imagine, will happen later on this year. But it does. I guess for those of us who are a bit impatient about everything being successful, it does go to show, getting this technology into games in a coherent way is a multi-year and like a decade-long thing. And every game they release, they understand better how to integrate it and how to have a good economy and not have speculation, but you want some speculation. And I wouldn't say with Night Crows, their token stuff I wouldn't say it's a complete disaster, but it's certainly not. It's pretty difficult for them, I think, to get that right. But it is sort of working. I think lots of other Korean companies who build these sort of games are looking at that sort of process. So from that point of view, I think they are definitely an example, and definitely, these games should be ones that people, are playing. Maybe having to spend a year grinding every day to get to that level is maybe a bit too much. But they're, we don't talk about them. Well, we do. We talk about them because I play the game. But in the Web3 gaming space, it's not a company that's mentioned very much, because it doesn't have this sort of like, it's a TGE and the NFTs are all flipping, and it doesn't. it's just a game with some
got a lot of hype, a lot
ownership.
of speculation, and it's not got currently anyway like on-chain players, so we don't tend to see them as like are they part of the most popular Web3 games, although having reached sort of 400,000 players, because those players aren't necessarily having on-chain wallets connected, because that takes, like you say, like a year for some of them, but in say 3-4 years time, when all those players are suddenly on-chain, things might completely change.
Well, I would say even at the moment you can track Night Crows on-chain activity through that radar. So I say they claim 250,000 daily just players. And I think they did at one point. I don't know why they did get over 20,000 daily active unique wallets. So that's sort of 10% ish. Maybe 8% of their audience was blockchain, which is sort of, if you said off the top of your head what sort of figure, I would sort of say, if you got 10% of your player base doing something on blockchain, that's actually not that's pretty good. So maybe I'm even underplaying a little bit. I would say just as a Korean company, that they don't really have any sort of executives who are sort of out there going, look at us, we're all great web blockchain success. I mean, I tried to get one of them. We were in negotiations to get someone on the podcast last year to talk about the game, and nothing ever happened. So maybe I'll sort of try again. But Koreans tend to be just not that. They're not like American entrepreneurs going forward and telling everyone how brilliant they are when there's nothing. They're very sort of calm and just sort of get on with it, rather than sort of evangelizing a token or anything like that, which is what we're used to.
Which we are coming on to now, I suppose, to some extent. Talking about Netmarble, not so much Netmarble, another game company I was out of South Korea. They announced their partnership with Immutable in 2024, and they have since sort of also attempted this kind of rebrand, new company, kind of slogan, fun first. And out of that, there's now some fruit, with 7 games launching throughout 2025 and more to come, but 7 games have been unveiled so far. A couple in Q2, I think, none in Q1, is it? Q2, Q3, and then the rest in Q4. So yeah, there's a bit of a different strategy there if you compare to kind of Wemade, which decided to go fewer, more high quality games rather than quantity, which obviously it's working for Wemade, but now Netmarble and Immutable are going the kind of opposite way. We've got plenty of games, 7 games coming out just this year, and more sort of that we haven't announced yet. And obviously Immutable keeps now quoting this number of over 500 games, I think, within their ecosystem. We'll come on to maybe why that isn't the case, because some of those games will have been shut down very likely, but 500 is what they claim at the moment anyway. So do you have anything to add to that Netmarble, Immutable news?
But it does sort of remind me, actually, I did sort of underplay this a little bit. So going back to Wemade, actually, as you sort of spent a lot of time studying, when they did first announce blockchain, they basically said they were going to put blockchain in everything, and they were going to have 100 games out with blockchain. And they did actually get up to, I think it was about 80 or something. And they were just adding blockchain elements into every single casual mobile game they could put their hands on. And that was just a total disaster. I mean, it was just literally, how much money they spent on that, and literally no one in those games, those games were not, no one was playing those games, and no one in those games was using blockchain. It was a total disaster. So they, after a while, sensibly just said, no, we're not doing that anymore. And clearly this MMORPG strategy is sort of the one they're going to focus on, because it's very high-end games. You're getting the in-app purchase revenue mainly. That's your main revenue. And then you've got this extra blockchain thing that you're learning about and building out.
It was definitely... Sorry, you say?
No, you go ahead.
No, yeah, there was definitely a trend. We sort of spotted it long before many of these ecosystems themselves. They would have spotted it, but they didn't go out and make any big announcements about it, because we were tracking the big list. And we could see that kind of 1 month we'd add 40 games to a network, and 3 months later 30 of those would be discontinued. So like 75% of the games they had just added were gone. No one played them. They they sort of started being discontinued, announced officially as discontinued. So yeah, it was clearly a strategy. If you're spotting trends, that was very obvious to see. So it wasn't a big surprise really when they came out with this sort of announcement. No. But it's similar, it seems to have been a wide trend in 2023, 2024. Similar with Come to Us, there was a sort of, we're going to have Web3 added sort of gradually into pretty much all the games. But we haven't really seen that big adoption from that. So I don't know where they're up to with that sort of strategy yet. We haven't spoken to them for a while, actually.
No, they've been quite quiet. But going back to so Netmarble, which is what you're talking about, announcing 7 games for Immutable. So they really have had to change a lot. So I think a lot of these Korean companies just sort of like piled in and thought it was going to be very straightforward. And so Netmarble, has its sort of what they all have is they have their own sort of Web3 arm. So Wemade has its Web3 arm called Wemix, and Netmarble has its Web3 arm called Marblex, and Come to Us has its own blockchain thing called XPL XPlay without the Y. Anyway, so all that sort of stuff. But Netmarble, in some ways, it looked like it had some really interesting games, and they were quite quick on the infrastructure stuff. I remember they had like a PC sort of launcher. You downloaded like a PC launcher, and it had all the games in there. And some of those games, I sort of played. They were sort of mobile PC type games, but the blockchain stuff wasn't there yet then. And then, it just clearly, they were just sort of throwing everything at the wall. And so they've had a really, again, quite a big sort of reset. And I think like all companies, I guess to begin with, you try everything, and then you sort of work out what thing works for you, and then you sort of focus on that thing that works. I mean, that's not in games. That's sort of in every sort of every company. When there's a new market, everyone tries it and then works out where they're going to actually optimize for. So Netmarble, Marblex has done this slightly garish sort of rebrand, which is in sort of fluorescent green, and it's called Fun First. And it's like, okay, and they got this goblin character who's sort of there. He's not awful. I'm not the target audience, I wouldn't think, but he's sort of this funny little goblin who's collecting gold, which I guess is a bit degen-like. I mean, that's the bad timing, given that degens have all been smacked down for the last few months. But anyway.
Oh, you love it.
Say again?
You love it.
I love it. So yeah, 7 games. But I guess my sort of question for Netmarble would be, Wemade has sort of worked out what it's going to focus on. Netmarble, I think, with these 7 games, are all sort of very different. There's like some casual type stuff. There is some more MMOR type stuff, but it's quite, it still feels like a little bit throwing various things at the wall to see what works. Obviously, they've sort of come off their own infrastructure and are going with Immutable, which to some degree sort of makes business sense. But equally, as we've discussed many times before, there's not this one big game on Immutable you can point to. Go, yeah, there's the massive big hit on Immutable that's brought 1 million people into the ecosystem. It's still this, as you say, there's hundreds of games potentially on Immutable, but there's even for us in the space, if someone said, "What's the best Immutable game?" There's not. Well, what's the big Immutable hit? You haven't. There isn't that yet. I mean, maybe it's coming with this Raven Quest game that's launching next month, but there's no obvious sort of thing there. So I think for Netmarble, my questions would be, are they on the right platform? But the platform they're on, I don't think is going to actually give them much sort of audience, sort of naturally in the way that maybe Ronin has been doing for some games. And I think their sort of game selection is also, a bit scattergun. But, if one of those works, and maybe one of those games is the game that is the big hit for, Immutable. So it's not to say the strategy is totally misguided, but there's a lot of sort of uncertainty around that at the moment. And I think it goes to show that, it was just quite surprising at the time how all the Korean companies, pretty much the only traditional gaming sector in the world that just piled into Web3 was South Koreans, and maybe their sort of struggles since then proves that these other big games companies were correct not to do it. I suppose that would be one way of looking at it. But to be fair, I don't think any of those big Korean companies have said we're not doing Web3 anymore. I think they are still sort of committed, and at a sort of board level to be doing this sort of stuff. Maybe some of them at some point will say we're not doing it anymore, but they are they're smart people who know how to make money on these games, and some of them will work out the way that they can do it, I think.
Do you think one of the problems Immutable has been sort of facing is when they announced this partnership with Polygon? Was that a lot of the games that had previously been on Polygon coming to Immutable, being promised sort of a small grant or whatever to sort of try and save the game, is that those games were already kind of having big problems and they hadn't got it to work on Polygon. So it's not like they got studios that were provably working and they had models that were sort of strong and sustainable, but they actually came with pretty flawed projects already, and sort of plenty of those
Yeah.
I have just not.
I don't. Well, I don't think that was. I don't. I mean, I think yes. To some degree, the fact that they're big. They focused at a high strategic level on. They were Polygon and Immutable were both trying to outcompete each other with grants, and that was just sort of counterproductive. That was very much fighting over the current size of the pie rather than growing the pie. But I guess kind of interestingly, what has happened to Polygon ever since then, which is basically Polygon, basically sort of seems to have sort of died on its arse as a blockchain, and the people involved not very bothered at all, got their money and won't say walked away. But
not much gaming there.
Well, but not much anything really. I mean, not much anything on Polygon at the moment. The whole joke Polygon. It's just it was 2 years ago. It was the big sort of Ethereum. Sort of not competitor. At one point, they tried to position themselves like that, but it was the big sort of effectively sort of the L2 for Ethereum. But it's now sort of irrelevant, really. But no, I just kind of think probably in retrospect, Immutable. They're smart guys, but they're not. They're very young and weren't in the gaming industry, and they probably even now I would say suffer from not having a really sort of strategic level of executives who have done like a John Linden or something, who's worked on Call of Duty, who's worked on some of these big, massive console games, and sort of knows that you sort of this sort of changes. I think this balance changes depending on where the industry is, but generally you want fewer, bigger eggs in one basket. If that sort of makes sense. Rather than you don't want 100 sort of small indie sort of games. Each of those will get one of them will be the biggest, and it will get you a certain audience. But compared to like 10 bigger bets, the games industry sort of always you lose more on those bets if they go wrong, and you only had 10 shots, so maybe there is a scaling thing there. If you have 100, but the hit can never. You need to find a balance between having the game that just really does well, that brings people, and particularly I think with blockchain is you need people. You want to bring people into the ecosystem. So if you and I guess interesting with Ronin was it did have this big hit with Pixels, and that brought people into the ecosystem. But then every game since then has just been recycling those people. But you need some big games to at least get people in. And with blockchain in particular, have they set up a wallet? If you bring people in, once you've got someone set up with a wallet, then there's some sort of, you can then having lots of games for them to play is sort of a good thing. But if you don't have the big game bringing people in, then it doesn't really matter, how many games you've got, at a sort of lower level.
That's what Immutable say they've done with these gems, and so they got through their Immutable passport, they've gotten over 4.5 million registered users now. So.
It's not nothing, but
they're not drawn in from a game. They're not particularly active players, but they've got them in their ecosystem, you would say. So if they did have a game, it'd be easy to get those people potentially.
Well, I guess my again, as someone who's basically hit the Immutable gems button every day for a year and got 2,600 gems, and still there's no functionality for gems. You just collected them for no reason. But so that's I agree with you on that point. They've got a few million people in there, but then. The people who came in to play Pixels on Ronin came in to Ronin to play Pixels, and they entered Pixels, and that had 1 million users at one point. It's dropped back off again. People churn out, but they came in and they played a game. For Immutable, people have come in and hit a button to collect some gems, and they've not gone into a game. It's because they weren't coming in for a game. They were coming in for, oh, what's this thing? Like, is it free money? Am I going to get some free tokens? Like, we all know if you're giving away free tokens, you can get millions and millions of, very poor projects have done millions and millions of onboarding by doing a TGE.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, yeah, it's great. And they've got loads of games. I just can't understand why they just can't go, right, these are the 5 games we're focusing on this year. We're going to just put, we're going to give away $10 million of tokens. I don't care, I wouldn't recommend you this, but, you need to get something where you go, this is the, this game had 1 million daily active users today. And quite, how you, even if you manufacture, I wouldn't, if I was the marketing guy, that's what I do, because that's a headline and everyone knows you've marketed it and blah, blah, blah. But at their level, as the biggest blockchain token, I feel maybe it's really good that they are not, they're not manipulating their ecosystem to make that statement. But I do think it's sort of odd because they do have some interesting games in there. One we won't really talk this week, but maybe later on. Space Nation, I spoke to them this week and started playing that, and it's, it's a space PC space, trading combat game. And it won't blow anyone's socks off, but it's just a really competent game. It's like $40 million budget out of China. It's had so far 20,000 players, not anything, but TG's happening quite soon. That'd be one where you could just pin your marketing money to that. It's not going to have 1 million players because they're not on Steam or Epic Game Store or anything like that, and maybe they're waiting for that to happen. But you just go, this is a really competent game. If you come in and play it, you're not going to have a bad experience. Obviously, it's free to play. And it just sort of strikes me weird. It's slightly weird that they just haven't done those, and maybe that's in the marketing plan for this year. But we're spiraling off to our favourite subject, which is the music.
We are. Yeah. Now, this week, though, Immutable did announce that they have partnered with the 3rd unicorn company following the Netmarble partnership that we just mentioned, and Ubisoft, the 2nd one. Now, the 3rd one is a Japanese one, but it took you a little while to find out who this. Can you just tell us sort of the backstory to this news and this partnership?
Well, just to go back as well, the other thing with Immutable and its $1 billion sort of things, so it did a deal with Ubisoft, but nothing's come from that yet. It's been announced. The Ubisoft games are not on Immutable, so that's a little bit parked. And again, this sort of comes back to, I just sort of think a weird marketing strategy on Immutable. So there's this press release that came out and said, we've partnered with this game called Tokyo Beast, which I had never heard of before, and maybe that's my fault because it's been around for a while. Actually, it was one of these games that originally announced for Polygon back in 2024. And as you said, the big thing is this is our 3rd unicorn games company that we're partnering with. That sounds great. Who is the company we're partnering with? Not in the press release, never been mentioned. So the first thing I did was it's not great detective work. I just sort of, who's the developer of this game? It's very Japanese, but the actual holding company for the game is actually based out of Dubai. I imagine that's for token issuance reasons. And nothing on the website for the game, or nothing in the white paper says who's developing it. You sort of have to click through to another website, which is about the token of the game. And that says the partners there are Sai Games and Gummy. So those are very well-known Japanese mobile game developers. Gummy's been doing some Web3 stuff for a while, so no great surprise. It's not a $1 billion company anymore. It was at one point. Sai Games is a $1 billion, multi-billion dollar games company making mobile games. Not many of the games they make would be known even for people in the games industry outside of Japan. So the Japanese games market is quite insular and has its very sort of tight IPs and stuff. And Sai Games have been very successful over the last 10 years doing that. So they seem to be the developer. And I would say this Tokyo Beast game is a very high-end game. If you look at it, it's like, even the website, it's really nicely done. Really quite sort of eye-catching and distinctive. But reading the white paper, it sort of gave me 2002 vibes. It's very, very what we might call high concept. It's really very complex. There's a Web 2 side of it. So again, maybe going back to a bit what we said with Wemade, you can just play the game as a Web 2 game. It's like a squad-based auto battler where you have these beasts, and you can you sort of actually reminding me a little bit actually of Ubisoft's Champions Tactics in some ways. So it's very sort of tactical. You're building, you're choosing these characters and you're gearing them and leveling them and adding mods and make very specific sort of stats around these. And you're obviously trying to build a good team where they all synergize together and you're fighting other people. So there's that. But then it sort of spirals out into this other sort of thing where there's a lot of gachas. So it's all about random boxes that you're opening to get these beasts. And then there's lots of sort of lottery tickets that you're sort of getting these lottery tickets to go into lotteries. And then there's a whole wagering element. So everyone's battling. There's PvP, playing other players, and PvE, going through dungeons and collecting loot and stuff. And everyone's playing in the week. And the top 20 players in the PvP arena during the week go into this championship mode at the weekend. And they're playing for big prizes. And it's live streamed. And, it's trying to make a big esports sort of thing out of it. May work, may not. Who knows? And that's just the Web 2 side. And the whole Web 3 side is you have these beasts, the same beasts, but they're NFTs here. And you're basically breeding them or sort of burning them to re-roll them to get better stats. And you can take your beasts and then people in the Web 2 side can sort of borrow a non-blockchain version of those and you get sort of passive income based on how popular your beast is. And this is really cool. Love this stuff. Seen it. People have tried to do this before. The main problem is if you only have 10,000 people playing, it just doesn't work. But yeah, they've got a token launch as well, and just everything is the whole bells and 13 whistles of blockchain crypto gaming. So the one thing I would say is they are clearly a really good games company. I don't know why they're not public about that. They are a public company in Japan, so you would think they would have to say that. But anyway, they've not said that. And it's actually coming out quite soon. It's actually Q2, these components are coming out. So on a personal level, I'm quite interested to play it. I just think it's bonkers. I just kind of think, I say it's made Japanese companies are making this for clearly for the Japanese market. And there's a long history of games being massively successful in Japan. Puzzle and Monsters being one, and Monster Strike being another. And they were just $1 billion. And they annually did billions of dollars of revenue in Japan and just did nothing outside in the rest of the world. And those companies spent a lot of money trying to launch them in America and China and places like that. It just didn't work. So my fear would be this is totally bonkers and just works in Japan.
But
totally bonkers doesn't work in Japan. But
it does emphasize Immutable's kind of not pivot, but that they are sort of trying to break more ground in Asia. With their Netmarble, obviously in Korea, and then this is the first high-profile kind of Japanese game on Immutable, isn't it? As far as I know, anyway. So it does show sort of that Immutable has kind of expanded into that market, and obviously just have to wait and see what fruit comes of it. Right, we are going to finish off talking about a game that was on Immutable, which this week announced that it would sunset development, but kind of not exactly quite still. It's a bit difficult because it's a bit up in the air at the moment. Clearly, it's not a decision that was taken lightly, and it's nothing that sort of the CEO of what's it called, Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow, like Chris Heatherly's studio. They didn't want it to get to this stage, obviously. But because the announcement went out this week, he's now had some offers of potentially being able to revive the game in different forms. So talk us through a little bit what's been up. Well, the Mystery Society is, first of all, I suppose, why it came to the decision of shutting down and why it may not.
Yeah. So Chris Heatherly, really well known in the game space, worked at Club Penguin at Disney back in the day, worked at NBC Universal on some of their big brands in mobile. He's known in the game space, outside of blockchain, and then sort of got into blockchain in the last couple of years. So I guess he's more an executive than a sort of game. He's not like a game designer sort of guy, but he's more an exec level sort of guy. And he came up with this game, the Mystery Society, and it's I have to confess I've never played it, but it's like an Among Us type sort of
spending an hour playing Minecraft.
Exactly. So it's one of these sort of social deduction games is what they call it, and it's sort of everyone knows what that genre is. They've done really nice sort of art style. It's compared to other blockchain games, really sort of stands out what they're doing. I guess my underlying sort of concern about it was Among Us was a massive game, particularly during COVID. But that sort of genre, it's not like people are desperately crying out for more of those games. As, even Among Us now is, I think has obviously fallen off massively from its peak, although it's been a massively successful game. So I think there was a little bit of it was a little bit niche, but there's nothing wrong with niche as long as you set your sales for niche. So they're based in the US, so it's obviously a bit more expensive, sort of dev cost wise. They announced they raised $3 million last year. $3 million seems like a lot, but if you got a team of 20 people in America, I don't know how big their team is, but it doesn't actually last that long. And as sort of picking it apart a little bit, it's their main investor was this fund called Shima Games, who were a very big crypto investor. Was at one point, probably in 2023, were the most active blockchain game investor. I mean, really, really big. They've had internal problems, so a lot of their people sort of fallen out, and their CEO sort of, I think, was getting sued by people, and so there's lots of sort of problems there, and it's not very clear how much they're going as a going concern. I had a quick look at their Twitter, and they've not invested in any game stuff or not announced any game stuff since summer of last year. So that's always difficult if your main investor for your first round is no longer investing. Then that's sort of like, well, we need to go and find like another lead investor to raise more money. And Shima was very focused on tokens. I mean, everyone was very focused on tokens then. So those people didn't generally want equity in a company. They didn't want to own part of the company, which is the general how a VC would work. They wanted to own a proportion of the tokens whenever the tokens went live, because tokens obviously are liquid, and you could potentially sort of sell out at least some of your investment, get some of your investment back quite quickly. So the Mystery Society was doing loads of tests and everything. It wasn't. Well, it did. So it was sort of fully live actually on mobile and PC, but it didn't have a big push. And its token was going to go live later this year. Clearly, even if it was still going, tokens at the moment are sort of dead a little bit, or a lot. So Chris Setherly's been sort of saying he's been trying to raise sort of money over the last sort of few months. Unfortunately, he also lives in the bit of LA that got burnt down, so he had to deal with all that sort of stuff as well. I don't think his house burnt down, but I think he had to get evacuated. And at the moment, as he sort of pointed out, crypto investing is pretty dead. Games investing, just in games, is pretty dead. The economy, we'll see where we are with Trump, but that's a bit sort of uncertain. And his lead investor wasn't investing anymore, and his other investors were quite small funds. So if you're going to do a round of like 3 million, your lead investor is going to have to take like $1 million or maybe 1.5 million. So you're looking for someone to give you like 2 million on a game that was sort of nice, could be an indie hit, but it wasn't like showing, I don't think, massive traction, because it wasn't one of these big sort of degen high concept, let's all be Tokyo Beast sort of, it was just a nice little project. So because he's sort of experienced and professional, he sort of said, I think a lot of these blockchain games are sort of dead, but they don't tell anyone because they just hope somehow their token will go up, or some magic, the blockchain crypto magic will come and save them, but they're really dead. So, but he's a proper person who hires people and has to pay severance and stuff. So he sort of basically said, today I think is the last day. Everyone's left apart from him in the company. But he put out this tweet at the start of the week saying, we're basically shutting down. This is our last sort of play test. Was yesterday. And he said, if anyone's interested, we got some ideas. So one version was they could just put it out as a Web 2 game. So strip all the Web 3 stuff out, put it out as a Web 2 game on Steam, and at least the people who want to play it can then sort of play it. And it seemed like, he's quite an outspoken guy on Twitter, so he's sort of known. And crypto Twitter is, a close-knit community, and people started reaching out. So the, who was it? Was it Games7 or B3? B3, I think, was sort of saying, oh, maybe you can come to us. And then the Ronin crowd was like, you got to come to Ronin because everything's successful on Ronin, which isn't true, but there seems to be a bit of interest sort of there. And there's various other sort of, I think, behind the scenes people who, people who could sort of take it on in some form, or because to some degree the game could be sort of seen as finished. Obviously, if they had more money, there's other things they do, but in the short time they could probably do some. You could probably just get it out there operating, and maybe there'd be this rallying around of people who, this game is going to go bust, but we saved it, so let's all go in and play. And they may be that may drive it up a little bit. So still a little bit uncertain. as I say, the team have sort of basically left now, and they're going to have to go and find another job. So unless some money comes in quickly, then that team will have sort of dissipated out again. I mean, I guess you could do something like a Kickstarter that might get you some money. So we'll sort of see how it plays out. But it's in some ways it's just a sort of characteristic of the sector and where we are at the moment. A little bit characteristic of that was not a game that was ever going to attract a mass audience, in my humble opinion. But there may be some, maybe a sort of a silver lining in the sense that someone will sort of pick it up. And it's sort of going back to our other thing is, as you sort of mentioned, Immutable in its 500 games, well, one of its games is just dying on its arse. I don't see anyone from Immutable saying, yeah, we'll give you a that would be, I'm not saying that this would solve Immutable's problem of having what's the big game on Immutable, but from a PR point of view, Robbie Ferguson comes in with $1 million to save this really cool game, and we're all going to be playing. I mean, that is a marketing angle that I would, consider, put it from that point of view.
Maybe.
Again?
The Inevitable Fund can come in.
Well, I mean, as you say, the Inevitable Fund, did we discuss it last week? I can't remember. But Inevitable Fund is this fund, supposedly $100 million fund. I mean, we sort of know now it's not that.
Go down there, okay? We need to finish.
No. Okay.
What about it?
Jenny's going to correctly stop me before I say libelous things.
We continued in regards to the Mystery Society, so not sunset entirely, at least for now. Right, thank you very much for listening in this week. We'll see you all next week. Bye.
It wasn't that bad.